How do you make your next presentation seem more like a conversation and not a speech or an official presentation? Because let's face it, we've all had conversations with friends that have lasted 5, 6, maybe 10 hours, maybe all night long, and we're having fun. It's interesting. It was never a boring moment. It was give and take. And yet we've seen people stand up, I'm now going to give this boring formal presentation. And before they've even gone 10 seconds, we're thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to be awful. This is going to be boring. This is going to be painful. What do we do if we're not on the front row? We pull out our cell phone and we check social media, email, and text. That's clearly not what we want. For your next presentation, for your next speech, for your next briefing, for your next talk, whatever you want to call it, keep in mind the audience doesn't want to be bored. So be lazy. What do I mean by that? Be lazy in the sense that do what's easy for you and what's easy for your audience. And that means make it more of a conversation. In conversations, if you talk to a friend and say, hey, what did you do this weekend? It's Monday morning. They don't stand up and say, well, at 6:01, I woke up. At 6:02, I went to the kitchen. At 6:03, I started the coffee machine. At 6:00, no, nobody does that. Yet that's kind of how most PowerPoint presentations are delivered. It's kind of how a lot of official speeches and briefings are done. A linear way of fact, bullet point. It's boring. That's not what conversations are. When you're having a conversation with a friend, several things are happening. You're trying to say the most interesting thing possible right now, right? You don't say, hey, this really interesting thing happened last night, but before we do that, let me tell you about everything I had for breakfast 3 weeks ago. No, that's not what you do. So you're trying to focus on interesting things. If a little humor can come in, you share it with friends in a conversation because everybody likes a good laugh. Everybody likes a chuckle, right? You don't try to overwhelm someone by how smart you are. You may have friends like that. You don't invite them to your parties, do you? You try to make it go back and forth. In a good conversation, you talk and you listen. Does the other person want to say something? Now, if you're standing up on a stage in front of 5,000 people, you can't have everyone ask you a personal question in the middle of your presentation, but you can listen to people. You can still ask a question and give people a couple of seconds to think about it. The rhetorical question is going to make your presentation more interesting. And if you're talking to a small group of people, 10 people or fewer, don't just make it a rhetorical question, actually ask a question and then shut your mouth, look, listen, give people an opportunity to respond, to say how they feel, to share. That's what will make your presentation seem more like an actual conversation. Now, the problem people have is, TJ, I'd love to ask people questions and make this a conversation, but there's no time because I have all this data to go through. No, you don't. The people you're speaking to do not have to know every single fact and number that you do. If they knew everything you knew, they'd have your job. Your job when you're giving a presentation is to really figure out of everything I do know, what's absolutely critical for this audience member to know. And then spend your time making that come alive. And one of the ways of doing it is to draw them into a conversation, to make them really think about it, reflect on it, to maybe get them to ask you a follow-up question so you can go deeper to make sure they really understand it. So those are a few tips on how you can turn any presentation, especially a boring presentation, into something that kind of looks and feels and tastes more like an interesting conversation.